This is the Mind Body Detox Podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom for how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back, everyone, to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. I'm your host, Mind Body Medium Kara Lovehart, and we're diving deeper into somatic practices, and we're going to talk about neuro meditation for healing trauma and navigating grief. Today, I bring on guests Jennifer Donovan and Mike Welsch, and they are two experts in nervous system health, and they blend modern science with holistic healing. Jen is a former licensed professional counselor with a master's in couples and family therapy, and she is also a certified nutritional therapy practitioner, a GAPS practitioner, and TRE provider. And she specializes in trauma recovery and holistic nervous system regulation. So it's all about that regulation. Love it. And then Mike, he has a background in exercise and movement science and neuro meditation level 3 instructor. This is what we're going to talk about today, right? What is neuro meditation? And Mike integrates movement, mindfulness, and brain-based training to support resilience and balance. So together, they're bringing in this really integrative approach that we love to healing mind, body, and spirit. And this is helping clients recover from trauma, stress, and chronic illness by restoring safety and connection within the body. So that, of course, somatic is of the body. So let's go and dive into the world of somatic healing and the world of neuro meditation with Mike and Jen. All right, guys, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here. And what a great introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to direct questions at one of you at a time. And I want to start with the personal journey. Where did you come from that led you to specialize specifically in somatic practices? And Jen, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I knew from a pretty young age that I just wanted to help people. That was definitely a calling I felt from the time I was really an undergrad in college. And so my whole journey has really just been pursuing the most effective ways that I can help people feel better in their bodies and live a fuller and more thriving and more self-actualized life. And so when I started getting into the mental health world, I found that talk therapy only did so much for people. And I started realizing that a lot of talk therapy was designed to just help people manage just kind of day-to-day problems. But I had a lot of people coming into my office where what they were dealing with was much more serious. And I started realizing that the more trauma and unresolved chronic stress someone had in their life, the more significant their mental health issues would be. It seemed like almost an exact correlate that more severe mental health issues that were really impacting people's quality of life was directly connected to how much trauma and adversity they'd experienced. And not only that they'd experienced, but not felt like they had the resources to be able to overcome, I guess more specifically. Not so much just the experience, but the experience paired with a lack of resources. And so I found, again, that my talk therapy training in the mental health world was just not cutting it for people. They'd come in with these really severe symptoms, mental, physical, emotional, and I just didn't really have the tools to help them. It'd be like the same thing over and over again that we would be spinning our wheels with. And so that's when I started getting into the world of the nervous system and realizing that part of the reason that I wasn't making progress with people was because it wasn't just in the mind, it was in the body. And so when I started understanding how the nervous system is really the facilitator of this mind-body connection, that we can intervene on the level of the nervous system, that's when I started seeing bigger transformations for people.
When I first looked at your website, when we were bringing you on to bend with us at our expo, I was so excited because I had not met someone yet on this corner of the world that not only has their background in psychology and interest in trauma, interest in somatic healing, but also that you specialize in GAPS, so gut and psychology syndrome. And I was seeing on your website, like everything connected to looking at issues with imbalances, nutritional deficiencies, and even like lead and heavy metal toxicity, which is part of my story. When we say working with the nervous system, like it's so much that integrative approach, like you have to address all of it. So I'm so glad to have met you, and I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah. And that was really the second
Yeah.
part of my story, around first just discovering like what the nervous system was, because when I was just starting out my career, like polyvagal theory was just kind of becoming a trendy thing to start talking about. And so before that, I didn't really have any awareness of that world. And so first just learning that and learning the physical nuts and bolts of how the nervous system works. And then with my own journey, I realized, okay, wait, we can't just feed the nervous system with these physical practices in terms of like regulation exercises and things like that. Although those are super, super important, we also have to make sure that the nervous system is being physiologically nourished. And that's where I started bringing in some of the therapeutic nutrition as well. And I find that to be such an important marriage of, yes, regulate the nervous system through your daily practices, but also learn how to nourish yourself properly at the same time, because your nervous system takes fuel to function. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Especially if you're someone that your nervous system is in overdrive, I think it even needs more care. Yeah. Let's introduce you, Mike. Tell us about your journey and what led you to specialize in somatic practices and then go into become a neuro meditation instructor.
That's a story, and it's long and winding, and I always am trying to find ways to elevator pitch myself. But I'll start by saying that I had a trauma history myself, which ultimately is probably what led me to this work. I found myself in my 20s in a job that was in a very high stress environment where I was doing disaster recovery for Fortune 500 companies, computer software. And it was super, super intense and stressful. And after a few years of doing that, I found myself in a very unhealthy position of being like obese and very depressed and very just what I now know was a freeze state, walking around in just like a barely functional kind of place. And so I found myself then being laid off from that job at some point and getting to a place where I just didn't know what to do anymore, where I really, really felt trapped and overwhelmed, and started moving my body just so that I had an outlet for my energy. And that eventually led me to deciding that I wanted to become a personal trainer. Working as a personal trainer, I was around a lot of highly motivated people. There's a lot of sympathetic activation, right? But there's not a lot of recovery or emphasis, especially when I was working full time as a trainer. There was not much emphasis on recovery. And so I saw in myself and in a lot of my clients people that were just really activated and were not coming down from that activation properly. And so we're walking around in even higher stress states, right? And initially I tried to get into exercise to help to relieve my own stress, but I found that there was kind of a paradoxical effect at some point when I started doing stuff like HIIT and like higher intensity stuff and trying to like always be go. And that led me to meditation. Started to meditate myself, built a practice, taught my clients, and then I met Jen. Through the course of our relationship, Jen very gently and delicately pushed a book across the table to me one day that was the DSM guide, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual Guide. And it was open to the ADHD page, which was revelationary, like a revelation for me. It was a whole new thing. I went and got diagnosed, started looking for tools to manage my ADHD that were not simply medication. And I found Neuro Meditation Institute, which is the work of Dr. Jeffrey Tarrant. And Dr. Tarrant's work has just changed everything for me in how I deal with my own cognitive processes and how I deal with other people, how I help clients. That's been a game changer. So that's what brought me here.
I am really excited to learn more about the neuromeditation and see how that effect impacted your symptoms as you progressed with ADHD and all these things. I really believe that it comes back to the nervous system. So I'd love for us to first, before we go into that, Mike, could you define what somatic practices mean to you? What is the definition to you, and what role did they play or have they played in your healing specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I think about somatic practice, I mean, it's obviously body based, right? If we say something is psychosomatic, we would say that is based on something psychologically that's affecting your body. But I don't even like that term, honestly, because I feel like we are a mind and a body. And that psychosomatic term is trying to chop us into two parts. And that's just not how we work. If I don't have enough sleep and I'm not doing things that I need to do to make sure that my heart is right, I'm going to feel like crap physically. It's just how it works, right? If I'm doing things to my body that are not good for myself, I'm taking a lot of chemicals or alcohol or artificial stuff, it's going to affect my mental health as well. And we know this, like anecdotally. We might not have a whole lot of studies that have been paid for by specific companies or whatever, but we know that there's this correlation. And for me, that is the importance of a somatic practice, is really just looking at things from a holistic standpoint. I'm missing half of the picture.
I love it. Yes, totally, 100%. I completely agree. Let's go and move it to Jen, and let's talk about your definition of somatic practices are and how they've supported you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would agree with Mike's definition. And I think we've all had that experience of feeling like something is stuck in our body, like anxiety is stuck in my body. Like I can try to think my way out of a situation, but I feel it in my gut or I feel it in my chest. And I think that's a healthy way to experience ourselves, actually, is having those visceral sensations. But the problem is that a lot of people are very overwhelmed by those experiences because we do live in this very dualistic society where we think about mind and body as separate. And we tend to think that any sensations we're feeling in the body are a sign of dysfunction. I think that's a really unfortunate side effect of our kind of Western medical model, is that we see symptoms as signs of dysfunction, when really I see symptoms as communication tools. Our nervous system cannot speak to us directly through language, but it can send us physiological sensations. And that's how we know what our nervous system needs, is it sending us those signals. And I had this happen in a very visceral way. When I was 25, I had a really major health crisis, and I ended up developing several very severe chronic illnesses, mast cell activation syndrome and dysautonomia. My immune system and nervous system just pretty much crashed. And of course, looking back, I can see that throughout my life, my nervous system had actually been talking to me by sending me symptoms. But because I had been raised in this Western society, I just saw them as annoying symptoms that I had to take medication for to suppress or ignore. And finally, my body got to a point where literally nothing I did could make me ignore it anymore. The symptoms were so severe and dramatic, and it impacted my life so much. And actually, the first thing that I started doing in the alternative realm, once I had kind of given up that the medications were going to help me, because they weren't, I started realizing, okay, I need to go into a more alternative way of looking at this and see what holistic medicine might have for me. And so one of the first things I found was the tension and trauma release exercise, the TRE. And it was a really serendipitous moment, because I was looking for something like that to become certified in because of the professional reasons I had been talking about earlier. I was just starting out my career, and I was looking for something that was a more nervous system based modality that I could use with my clients. But at the same time, I was in the midst of this major health crash, and it was actually exactly what I needed in that moment. So clients came later, but I ended up going through the certification process, and like any good certification process, you have to use the modality on yourself initially. And so I spent a year like doing this modality every day, sometimes a couple times a day. And so much unlocked in my body that I had no idea that I had been holding on to and repressing for so long. And so that's really how I started connecting with somatic practices initially, was through this specific modality, and saw the way firsthand it transformed my life and made me more able to incorporate other healing practices down the road that I did need for my recovery. I don't want to make it sound like that one modality was what resolved all my health issues. It was much, much more than that, but it set the foundation for my body being able to accept other practices later on.
Oh my gosh. I'd really be curious to hear either some of the experiences you've had or experiences your clients had in that modality, and maybe what it looks like in practice, illustrating that for us.
Yeah, so it was developed actually as a self-help tool that could be done in group settings, which I love because it's so empowering. It's really important to work with a practitioner initially to get into the process, especially if you have a complex trauma history, just in case anything big comes up. But it's meant to be a very empowering tool that you can do on your own or in group settings so that it's very financially accessible for people. And basically what you do is you do a series of stretches that start to release the fascia on the front side of the body, because that's where we tend to get very contracted when we're in these chronic trauma responses. Our body tends to contract forward and inward. And so these exercises are designed to start to open up those lines of fascia in the front of the body. And then, we create a safe and grounding place for you to lie down in a position where your psoas muscle and your hip flexors are pretty relaxed. And it sounds really wild, but just this simple practice of these series of stretches and then being in a receptive and grounded state, your fascia will start to spontaneously vibrate and tremble. And some people may have experienced this before when they have been in a stressful situation and then gotten out of that stressful situation. Like, say you got in a car accident and then you get home and you take a shower and lie down in your bed, and then you just start shaking. And you think oh, I'm just still in shock, right? That's kind of how people tend to think about it. Is, oh, I must still be in shock. But that's actually your nervous system trying to discharge all the cortisol that was created during that experience and release some of the tension patterns that formed during that accident. So that would be obviously a very acute dramatic example, but this happens in small ways throughout our lives with all the kinds of trauma and stress that we encounter. And yeah, the goal is really getting the fascia to start vibrating. And this is it's called a neurogenic tremor. It's coming from the brainstem. So it's not like muscle fatigue tremors, like if you work out really hard and your legs start shaking from that. It's actually different. They have actually studied this, and it's a different type of tremor that's coming actually from the brainstem and not from the muscles. And some of the recovery, I feel like my own is pretty dramatic, but I have seen so many incredible things resolve just through this modality. I've had clients who have had years of chronic pain just evaporate. I've had clients have lifelong panic attacks just go away and disappear. I've even had people with seizure disorders use it to prevent themselves from having seizures. The application is so diverse and dramatic.
It's diverse because you're working with the nervous system. And I think we often, if we don't really understand it, we're not nerding out like you and I are. We're like, nervous system is so great because it's what runs everything. I think that's why oh, how can this fix all these things or potentially support all these things? I'm like, that's the answer. The answer is the nervous system.
Exactly. I know all of these different conditions, they're actually not that different from each other. It's just different ways the same underlying imbalances are manifesting.
Yeah. And that's the same thing because I do a lot of fascial work as a massage therapist and a body worker. And even in the Kundalini yoga I teach, there are positions where we are just allowing the fascia to unwind. And I've experienced those firsthand, releasing, crying. So I'm really curious about the connection to the specific use of the modality for releasing the fascia in the front for TRE and some of the experiences I've had in Kundalini. And even there's somatic experiencing. There's a lot of different types of movement practices that have come out in the somatic world. But it seems to me that it's really all about releasing and unwinding the fascia and the holding patterns so we can move from the dorsal vagus vagal tone to ventral. And I would love if you could maybe touch on that a little bit for the polyvagal theory for people who are not aware of what that is, because that would maybe help people to illustrate these postures and really what might be happening in the nervous system with stress response.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think that a lot of these modalities are actually getting at the same underlying mechanism. Our nervous systems know how to heal, and on a very primal level. And so all we're doing is finding different ways to tell the nervous system, okay, it's time, you can do it. And so for some people, it's going to be somatic experiencing. For some people, it's going to be through body work. For some people, it's going to be through TRE. So it's whatever works for people is great, but I think we're all ultimately getting at the same things. And yeah, that is basically getting the parasympathetic nervous system back online. So our vagus nerve, which is that wandering nerve that is the primary hub of that mind-body connection, it modulates our parasympathetic response, which would be like the calming response in our nervous system. It's what dampens our nervous system down. So sympathetic gets us activated and parasympathetic dampens that down. And a healthy nervous system should be in a balance between the two. You should be in this flow state, basically, of ebbing and flowing up and down, fight or flight, to more calm, right? Just little bits of stress are going to get you activated, and that's normal. That's part of life. But then your nervous system should be able to bring you back down to this calm baseline. But what happens is when we have vagus nerve impairment is that we tend to get stuck in what is called dorsal vagal, which is the more primitive part of this parasympathetic complex. And this is where it's like someone pulled the emergency brake. So there's not a lot of nuance to this part of our nervous system. It's just basically stop all systems. And so this would be associated more with our freeze response, which is confusing because it's part of our parasympathetic system. And so when we say, oh, parasympathetic is calm, it's rest and digest, but then we say freeze is a part of our parasympathetic nervous system, I think people get confused about that because freeze is more of a survival state, but it's just basically like turning the dial all the way down. So you're not calm, you're frozen. And so when we're in that frozen state of our nervous system, which is basically like total overwhelm, right? It's like the plan C of the nervous system, of what can I do to make me survive even among very adverse circumstances. And for humans, that doesn't always look like being chased by a tiger. Sometimes I've been under immense work stress for 20 years, or I've been in this unhealthy relationship with my mom since I was a little kid. It can be those kinds of like interpersonal stressors. But basically what happens is when you're in that dorsal vagal state, you're collapsed. And so that is mapped in your fascia, where you basically just collapse inward and the front line of your fascia starts to shorten and contract inwards. And so people will get into these habitual postures where their shoulders will be hunched and their head will be jutted forward and their chest will be collapsed and their pelvis will be misaligned. It creates a lot of structural issues in the body, which can then lead on to all sorts of different health issues. But the whole idea is that we need to lengthen and open that front of the body to get the fascia to unwind, and that's going to signal the nervous system that maybe it's safe to come out of freeze.
Yeah. There's so many amazing experiences I've had as a body worker with people having these unwinding experiences, emotional releases, crying, anger, shaking, that can be kind of a little bit unsettling for people. They don't know, they're not expecting it. So that's where, part of the work with what people are doing with you is, you're educating them beforehand of what they might expect, what could potentially happen, so that they're entering into a safe, trauma-informed space, which I think is really important in this work, because people are not always prepared and they don't know. And it may not be something crazy intense, but I think the thing that I find really cool that I love is the awareness of the body and how it works and the nervous system regulation, and being able to expand my capacity to hold a lot of stimulation. Not that I'm like, give me more stimulation, but I find that people who've been through a lot, Mike, you were saying this too, that your nervous system, you push it and it seems to then have like almost like a muscle, like gaining more strength for more capacity, more bandwidth to hold stress, to hold emotional intensity in the body. So I'd love to hear from either of you, maybe Mike, 'cause you're shaking your head here, about what that's been like for you, because it seems that we just need to increase our capacity for stress and emotional resilience, not only for relational, but for professional. Like sometimes goals, we sabotage things when our nervous system gets too, I can't do that. And it really impacts us on a deeper level than just trauma and maybe pain in the body. It can really affect us in personal growth too.
Yes, capacity. So capacity is, if I was looking at this from the standpoint of a personal trainer, right? Capacity is all about resilience. And we can talk about resilience in the musculoskeletal system, or we can talk about resistance in the nervous system. I think before I go too much further into that, though, I do want to comment on all the fascia talk, because I don't think a lot of people recognize that the nervous system is the fascia. The fascia is innervated, right? We have things like reflex responses that do not happen in our brain, but actually are at the brainstem, or, Golgi tendon responses and things like that too, right? When we're talking about building capacity in our nervous system, we're talking about the musculoskeletal system. We're talking about the physiological chemical processes. We're talking about the effects of even structures on our brains, right? And once again, if I'm referring back to personal training, we could talk about progressive overload. And what progressive overload is basically gently, through whatever means we're talking about, physical, mental, brain exercise, meditation, whatever, bringing ourselves just to the limits of our ability, right? Just to the edges of either our skill or our capacity, and then stopping there and giving ourselves time to rest and relax and recover, right, from that damage that we've done. Like, whether we're talking about muscle or whatever else, there is a toll that is taken on our nervous system or our musculoskeletal system or whatever. And if we don't allow the recovery, even down to the level of like fibroblasts in your bones rebuilding, right? If we don't allow that recovery to happen, then things break down. It's just how it is. And so we have to allow the recovery process, the rebuilding, which typically happens at night when we're asleep, or when we're in deep meditative states like theta brainwaves. That's a very recovery-oriented state that we can put ourselves in as well. But without those recovery points or processes in our workflow, something has to give. And that can be illness, it can be mental collapse, it can be adrenal burnout, right? It could be not paying close enough attention, getting in an accident. There's always something that gives.
It seems that the word recovery is also similar to the allowance word that I'd mentioned multiple times. We have to allow. And because when we don't allow through the body to naturally do its thing, to unwind, to rest, to recover, either through conscious trying to guide ourselves into meditation, to allow or let go, or sleep, that then you have these accidents and these things that if you're not allowing, somehow the nervous system will get so tight and so overstimulated that it just can't hold it together anymore, and something happens. And this is where people do get sick, or they have a mental breakdown, they have a collapse, like you said. So it's like forced allowance is going to happen, even if you don't allow. So being mindful with it and being aware of how it works, I think is really valuable. And so interesting with capacity. So I'm sitting here, I increased my capacity over the last couple months with doing podcasts because I'm in a new podcast recording area. My office is getting remediated and of mold, interestingly enough, nervous system regulating thing there that totally sets you off. So that was in an interesting state. So now I'm in front of these lights, which I usually had more natural lighting. And I've noticed my capacity to be under these lights is a certain amount of time before I get, okay, this is way too much. And I think about people who are on screen all the time, like actors and actresses, like this is a stimulation to my nervous system. But with my awareness of the tools that I can use to kind of allow myself to calm it and then listen to it when I need to say this is enough now. But I've been increasing my capacity to be under these lights. So that's just a practical example. That's not necessarily capacity to, deal with my son's 19-year-old crap, but like those were things that I'm building capacity to as well. These are all the things where can we allow more. So before we go into neuromeditation, do you want to mention anything, Mike? Because I want to talk to you next about neuromeditation and what that is. So before we go into the neuromeditation and what that is, Mike, could you share with us a little bit about, if you feel called, your experience with the TRE? And either observing clients or we can just go into how the neuromeditation has helped, because you couple those together, the neuromeditation and the TRE practice for you and Jen.
Yeah, the neuromeditation and the TRE work really well together, but I actually discovered, Jen introduced me to TRE before I found neuromeditation, if I remember correctly. And just coming to it from my perspective as an exercise scientist, physiologist, whatever you want to say, I was really, really intrigued by it because I did understand already that the nervous system was kind of like this innervated little bit of tissue and things that kind of we didn't really know a lot about, that winds in between all of our muscle fibers and holds our bones together and all kinds of other like all kinds of other structures that we didn't really investigate a lot. And so there's a couple of books, that I'd read while I was in college, anatomy trains and stuff like that talk about the fascia, but I didn't really have, other than like foam rolling and what I knew from like my physiology classes and from going to, I was privileged enough to actually be able to go to a dissection lab as a student. So I was able to have a little bit of hands-on experience with corpses and things. And I actually saw fascia a little bit more hands-on than a lot of people maybe have. And so like just coming at TRE from that perspective and with that knowledge base and seeing more hands-on the impact of the fascia than just this is tight and this hurts and I pulled this and it feels funny, but seeing like that the fascia was actually active in such a subtle way, right? Like a subtle way that was also at the same time really powerful, for me was a game changer, like a mind-blowing thing. And I personally had some really intense experiences with TRE, like after doing yoga or other things like that, where I'd just had a kind of a pretty intense, profound, like energetic release, almost like bringing me to tears, right? That kind of thing.
Wow.
After just really... And for me, I think part of what was powerful about it was the moving myself, with the exercise, with yoga, with whatever else, and then doing TRE afterward, right? As an intentional practice to do that unwinding or that releasing. And it was just like a game changer. Like it really blew my mind. And so that was, I think, part of why I was really into doing the work that we started doing with Soothe, was just because I saw the power of what Jen was doing, and I felt...
Yes, no, it's so up my alley. I was like, oh, finally people who can understand the language I'm talking about, so we could, let's play in the sandbox. Let's talk about this stuff. It's so great. And I do most of the job that I have is feel like I'm educating people about it. So it's really nice that you guys get it. And then we're going to go deeper, because the even more of the stuff that's totally speaking my language is, let's talk about brain waves. Let's talk about neuromeditation. Let's go into that and what it actually is as a modality and how it differs from traditional meditation practices.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. I have a model and everything. I've been working on this for a week. So neuromeditation was developed by Dr. Jeffrey Tarrant. He is a board-certified neurofeedback practitioner and psychologist, and he was the mindfulness-based stress reduction professor for the University of Missouri, I believe. And he basically started studying meditation, and specifically he was studying mindfulness-based stress reduction styles of meditation, but then really started looking at the other data that's out there that people have gathered on different styles of meditation, and kind of looked at what they were studying and started collating a lot of the data. And then he's also done thousands, I'm sure at this point, thousands and thousands of brain scans on people and collated all of that data as well. He scanned me twice. He got Jen once. He's gotten all kinds of different neurotypes and people with experience with meditation and with no experience with meditation. And he just really found structures in all of that data and all of these specific meditation styles. And he's kind of organized that into basically 5 structures that he can say this structure affects this area of the brain and puts you in this specific brainwave state and ameliorates this particular issue you might be experiencing. And those styles would be focus meditation, which is basically kind of a primary practice that you need for spiritual development or for any other style of brain exercise or meditation. I've gotten out of the habit of saying meditation quite so much. I would say brain. People have so many prejudices around what meditation is, but focus being a primary example of focusing on a singular point or focusing on a singular idea or sensation. And then what we refer to as mindfulness, which would be a broader focus, like an open focus where you're just experiencing being in the here and now without any sort of past or future orientation, but just being super present, right? And that's why breath or more body-based meditations are so powerful, is because you can't be thinking about something that's in the future if you're in the present moment with your breath. And then what we refer to as quiet mind, I like to say quieter mind, be kind of a parallel to transcendental meditation, that sort of spaciousness and being present in a very quiet place where there just isn't a lot of activity. And then focus, mindfulness. Ooh, man, I just had a huge brain fart. Focus, mindfulness. PTSD is mindfulness. Focus is for
Open heart.
ADHD. Open heart, or thank you, loving kindness, compassion meditation. That would be what we would use for things like grief or for not active depression, right? When we're in a neutral state and are trying to elevate, or yeah, all kinds of working through resentments, working through forgiveness, right? Things like that would all be considered like loving kindness or open heart. And then there's also one that is called deep states, and that would be past quiet mind, right? When you are completely quiet and you are in a place where you are able to release your expectations of what your meditative practice should be, and you're able to get into a more kind of almost dreamlike, fluid theta brainwave state where it gets a little bit maybe out of body or maybe just dissociated from your self-referential process in a way that you can examine things in without resistance, right?
Yes. Yes. So could you name the 5 again?
Yeah, hopefully I can get them all this time. Focus, quieter or quiet mind, loving kindness, and mindfulness, and then deep states.
And
Not necessarily in that order.
And then it doesn't matter what the order. Could you go through and say which one's good for each thing one more time?
Yeah, totally. So focus is really good for people who have ADHD or mild traumatic brain injury.
So that's more working with the frontal cortex?
Yeah, it's bringing more blood flow to your prefrontal cortex. Hang on just one moment, and I will bust out my little guy here. We're bringing more blood flow to a very specific section of your brain, and this is your brain. This is forward orientation, so eyeballs are right here. This is your prefrontal cortex, this blue bit. So what we're doing with focus meditation is we're getting deep into this prefrontal cortex. And we're touching this part here, this purple ring, which is your cingulate cortex. And the anterior, the front part of the cingulate cortex is the part of your brain that's engaged when we're in a focus, this thing is lit up like a Christmas tree.
And I feel like more of the Starbucks coffee drinkers and the stuck in beta brainwaves because we have to have caffeine and stimulants to keep us in that focused state is what is the downfall of society. At the same time, I don't know if you guys ever listened or read the book, This Is Your Mind on Plants by Michael Pollan, but one of the things is it's so interesting talking about the Renaissance was alcohol was the main use of substance downers. And then we moved into caffeine and the coffee bean took the world by storm. And then everything changed because the consciousness of a human was more of this like relaxed state. We're not like we need to get things done and then focused intent, conversations, inventions. And now where we are. And then what comes on to help us support like nervous system regulation, everything, what you guys are doing, but even like psychedelics and even cannabis. Like there's a need for the collective to move out of this beta brainwave. And if you can't, like your ADHD, because you can't focus so much because of nervous system dysregulation, that's another thing altogether. But I'm just putting that piece in there for fun and for conversation. If you feel like commenting on that.
I would love to comment on that. And then actually what you're talking about with the beta brainwaves is a high beta, right? High beta is very angsty and stressful and I'm like, skin crawling and I'm just so stressed out, but I might be focused though. And so really what we want a predominance of ideally, and we want different brainwaves in different parts of our brains too. So I want to get into the ADHD thing because you were talking about stimulants. And one of the reasons why stimulants for people with ADHD help is because we have a lot of theta in our prefrontal cortex. And so theta is like the slowest brainwave you can have and still be conscious. And if we think about what our prefrontal cortex does, it's primarily inhibitory. And that is maybe why people with ADHD have outbursts or have a hard time controlling and regulating their emotions, is because there's a lot of slow brainwave activity in this part of our brain that is responsible for regulation and executive function and problem solving and all kinds of other stuff that's really important. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. And because I've had multiple episodes now where I'm never here to diagnose, I'm never here to say that ADHD can be healed, but I'm like, I really think it's a dysregulation. I think it's dysregulation. And we had Dr. Robert Melillo on. So he is an incredible neuroscientist that's done a lot of research in overactive, underactive parts of the brain. He has the brain balance centers that are around the world for children for development. And then he has a place in New York that's working with like nonverbal autistic people and like really big brain issues for autism, ADHD, depression, or treatment-resistant depression, all that stuff he's talking about. It's just parts of the brain that are underdeveloped or underactive or need balancing. That's all it is. And even developmentally. So again, this is other pieces of the puzzle for people at home to put this all together, that it's not just one trauma that happened to you. It's things that happened to you as a child, things that are happening now, your perception on what those things are. Things like heavy metals and nutritional deficiencies, like all of these things can connect together.
Yeah.
So let's go dive deeper into, oh, go ahead,
I
Jen.
was just
Say,
going
we'll
to
go
add
into the
this. I just wanted to add that this conversation is just a great example of why
Yeah.
I think neuromeditation is such an important modality, because exactly what you're talking about, if someone is stuck in these high beta brainwaves all the time and they're like hyper fixated on things, and then they are like, oh, I'm going to start meditating because I heard that's good for my mental health, and they happen upon a guided meditation that's a focused meditation, it might actually make them feel worse, right? It might actually make them feel more keyed up. And so then they're going to say, I guess meditation doesn't work for me. But it's just that person actually needed maybe more of a mindfulness or quiet mind style of meditation to actually slow their brain waves down. Whereas the opposite is going to happen. Like someone like Mike, if he tried to start with a quiet mind meditation when he first started meditating, he would have thought meditation doesn't work for me because it's actually exacerbating the problem that his brain imbalance has in the first place. So starting with a focus meditation was actually the way in to be able to meditate for him. And so again, this technique of being able to assess what people's neurotypes are and then what meditation style is actually going to be most appropriate for them makes meditation more accessible for more people.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Mike, do you want to go into, talked about the beta brainwaves, the frontal cortex, and this is the focus meditation. Could you go through again the other four and what they're for? Just again?
Yes, of course. So focus meditation is primarily to get that prefrontal cortex activated. And just like a muscle, right, when we activate something on one part of the body, the thing on the other part of the body slows down. And back here is the primary hub of what's called our default mode network. And this is the part of our brain that's just going monkey mind when we are not thinking about something else. I have a meeting next week I don't want to deal with. Oh man, did I say something silly on this podcast? All of that stuff is back here, right? And so if I'm warming this up, I'm slowing this down. And that is really kind of the prime thing that we're doing in mindfulness meditation as well, as we are warming up other parts of the brain and we're slowing this part down. And that just gives us that ability to be quieter, right? When this is not bouncing around all over the place, there's less intrusive thoughts, there's less stuff that I have to try to not focus on when I'm trying to focus on the other thing. And so mindfulness, however, also affects more of the inner parts of the brain, like the hippocampus, which is actually deep here. If I can pop this off. I don't know how effective this is going to be, but this little tiny, itty tiny bit brain inside of here, inside of this big thing, is the hippocampus. And that part of our brain is kind of the part that knows what safety is and determines what safety is. And a lot of that is based on prior experiences and our perceptions. And the hippocampus mindfulness is really helpful in retraining the hippocampus to right here and right now, everything is okay. Like I have a roof over my head. I'm on a podcast, so I must be all right. I'm not being chased. So it's literally like retraining myself to be like, I'm on a podcast. I'm not being chased. Everything is okay right this moment, so that I can be regulated when I'm doing things that make me nervous. And that is literally what the mindfulness practice is just varying exercises that we can use, some of which are very externally focused. I'm focused on colors and sounds and textures and tastes and smells even. And then I also like to break it up into a more internally focused, body-based. Here's my breath pattern. Here's my cognitive process. What's going on with me today? And so that is affecting PTSD or CPTSD issues. We're remapping safety. We are just kind of turning down the overall activation of that sympathetic nervous system and getting into just a more alpha brainwave state, right? Above theta, not unconscious, but relaxed and present.
And then what about the metta meditation, the open heart meditation for healing resentment, grief, more memory related to, is it usually related to others and like it's more impacting the limbic system? So it's like relational only, or tell me more about that one.
I feel it is absolutely affecting the limbic system, and it is absolutely relational. But I feel like, once again, we tend to break these things up into other people versus us. And that is our default mode network, our self-referential process, our ego that is able to do that. And so if I think about things that way, I also have division in my compassion. And I see this a lot with clients, right? I see a lot of people say, oh, I do compassion meditation all the time. And, I pray for people. And then I say, when was the last time that you relaxed? What do you do to take care of yourself? When was the last time that you took a vacation? And they're like, oh, I don't do that. I don't have time for that. Right. And they're like, where's your self-compassion? If our compassion doesn't include ourselves, we're missing a huge part of it. And so compassion is not only resentments and forgiveness, but also really loving myself and maybe forgiving myself for things that I've done that have put me in a bad position or have made me sick or have that I feel guilty for, right? Even if it's not something that I'm directly guilty for, maybe I've been blamed for something my whole life. I drop things, I break stuff, I'm not paying close attention. And I have to forgive myself for those things so that I can let go of them and explore them and go, where did that idea that I'm always screwing things up and breaking things come from? And then I can follow that little rabbit hole and go, my dad told me that. And then I can do compassion for my dad too. And all of those compassion practices have to come together. It's a lot of plates to spin at the same time, but it's a necessary thing.
Awesome. I wanted to see if we can bring Jen and see if she can give us an idea of how this works together. We're going to wrap up here soon. So I want to make sure that we have this awareness of neuromeditation, the TRE, how these complement each other, and anything else you want to share about this work that we haven't touched on already.
Yeah, I think that they are incredibly complementary. I think it varies from person to person which we start with and which we evolve to. I like it when our clients are doing both practices. But for some people, there is so much tension and anxiety and stress stuck in their body that there is no way they are going to sit down and start to try to do brain exercises. It's just not even remotely accessible to them. And so for someone like that, we would start them with TRE, and we would start them with actually helping them figure out how to somatically discharge energy out of their body so that just their nervous system baseline can come down enough that they can actually like sit and do these practices for 10, 20 minutes a day in the first place. So that would be a certain and a profile of a client. On the other hand, sometimes we have people that are so disconnected from their body that the idea of engaging a modality like TRE, which may feel really vulnerable or may feel like kind of weird. They may feel really uncomfortable with the idea of their body moving in a way that they're not directly controlling. So the TRE would not be accessible for that kind of person. And they're actually going to do much better at first with a structured protocol where they're like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do these few things with my brain. And that's going to benefit them, of course, because both modalities really benefit everyone, but that's going to be a place in. And then once they start to get their cognitive patterns more rebalanced and they're not having as much like ruminating self-critical thoughts because they've been doing the brain exercises, then maybe something like TRE is going to feel more accessible to them and they're going to feel like they can be vulnerable in their bodies and loosen up a little bit and do something like that.
Yeah, I thank you so much for the both approaches, because you're right. People are not ready for everything all at once. And I'll remind the listeners this because sometimes you jump on a modality or some sort of program or thing helped you so much. And we can sometimes evangelize people to something that's not right for them. And then they're like, I don't want to do that. And then especially when you want to help people so much, like you got to try yoga, you got to try breath work. And just remembering that everybody's individual, like it may not be what's right for them, but there may be something else. That's why I say share this podcast, because then they can find all different types of things that might be interesting for them to dive into. So let's move into anything else you guys want to share. And I want to go into any upcoming workshops or things you're excited about and how we can connect with you guys.
One last thing that I just wanted to share was one of the things that I really like about neuromeditation is that there is like a scaffolding that you can use, right? I touched on it for just a hot second, but I mentioned that for people who suffer from depression, compassion is a helpful meditation tool. But the problem is that if we go from an actively depressed state, like a frozen state, I don't want to get out of bed, maybe, right? To trying to do compassion meditation, it feels fake. It doesn't work. You can't get yourself physiologically into a compassionate state where you're feeling it in your body. It just doesn't happen. And like, that's why the scaffolding approach with neuromeditation is really nice, is because I can use a different technique like mindfulness or focus to get myself neutral. I can get myself out of that place where I'm telling stories and get myself to a place where there is not very much storytelling happening. And then I can gently ease my toes into the compassion stuff. And so like that, just having the flexibility of that tool where we can layer different things depending on what's going on with the brain. We can ask specific questions to determine what tools to use. And then we can layer the TRE in with that and weave the two together. It's been really phenomenal. I just wanted to touch on the scaffolding aspect too.
No, I think that's really helpful, Mike. Thank you for saying that. And I just want to add to it, like these practices, there's so many levels to them. If someone's in a really active physical or mental health crisis, these tools are so powerful at getting people out of that, but then it's going to evolve with your journey. So maybe you're just doing like a focus or mindfulness practice to just get out of your intense rumination that you're stuck in, or to just get your body out of fight or flight, or you're doing some TRE just to discharge some of the intense stress that you have stuck in your shoulders, and you get out of that. But then those practices are going to take you to a deeper level of wellness as well, because there's just not being acutely ill, and then there's actually thriving. And some of my favorite sessions to do with people are people who have done a lot of foundational trauma healing work, but they still come to me for TRE because they know there's even a deeper level of spiritual self-actualization that they're like on the cusp of, that they can't quite reach. And I've had people have incredibly profound spiritual experiences, where they feel like there's all sorts of metaphysical energies or angels or, ancestors in the room with them, like having these profound experiences. And it just shows you that the more you regulate your nervous system, the more possibility you have open to you. And same with the neuro meditation. I mean, obviously, this is a very scientific, like very neuroscience-based modality that will get people out of critical mental illness states. But as you get to more of that balanced and neutral brain state, these tools can help take you to these greater and more expanded states of consciousness and awareness too. And that's where some of the quiet mind and deep space practices come in. So it just keeps going. And it's so beautiful to see people in all stages of their healing journey.
You guys are speaking the language. That comes down to every single thing that I do is helping people regulate the stress response because they need the higher level brain on. If it's not online, you don't have access to creator, your intuition, whatever you call creator, your mystical experiences, innovative thinking. You don't have access to it. And so many people don't have access to it. And then they're like, how is that person having these incredible experiences? Either they're disassociated from trauma and that spiritual seeing spirits and all this stuff is from mold toxicity or lead or something like that can put you in these states. They're actually like distorted borderline psychoses. And because trust me, I worked a lot with that. Or they're like, I'm actually having these experiences from a regulated, non-distorted space in my consciousness because I've expanded. And that's where we want to help people get to, because that's where people then manifest their lives and all the different language we use for, I'm creating this incredible thing. I'm in the flow state. I'm doing the thing. I'm seeing synchronicities. I'm seeing signs. That's the magic. And you don't get there if you're not regulated.
Yeah.
So I'm so grateful that you guys are doing this work. It's so cool to talk with you guys.
Yeah, it's been great. I'll give a little rundown on like where you can find us and all that kind of stuff. If you'd like. We work under the umbrella of Soothe Wellness, and we have a website, experiencesoothe.com. You can come see us in person, or we do some limited online services as well. So I do what I like to call trauma release ceremonies. And so this is the trauma release exercise, but I like to make it into this really beautiful, intentional space where you can really have a deeper experience with it. So you can come do that with me in person. And then Mike will do meditation, the neuro meditation coaching, and you can book with him just to have him assess your neurotype and be able to provide specific brain exercises that he wants you to do. But then we also have the option to upgrade to a neurofeedback package. And I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that, Mike. You might explain it better than me.
Yeah, I'll try to elevator pitch that one too. It's hard. So many cool things. There's this really cool technology where they basically have an EEG machine, which is an electroencephalograph, which reads the electrical activity on the surface of your brain. You can rent one of these doodads now from a company and use it in your home and hook it up to a platform that we use called Divergence Neuro. And you pop the cap on your head. It shows you a video. You put the electrode in the specific spot that we instruct you to, and I can sit in my personal office right here and watch what your brain is doing while you're doing your sessions. I can create a program for you where you just pop into this thing every day and run your app, and then I can tell you, this is the progress of your brainwave states. We're trying to shift you from here to here. Here is how things are going. This is where I noticed that you fell asleep while you were meditating, right? Like, it's really wild, and it's using the neuro meditation protocols. And so basically what that looks like is they put an app on their phone. They watch a video with this cap on. If they, for instance, if it was a focus meditation, they're supposed to be focusing on the video. They start thinking about going to get groceries. The app video screen goes black and the sound turns down really low until they go, oh, I'm not paying attention. And they come back and then it comes back up. That's what neurofeedback is. Just It reads your brain and says, you needed to switch this to this state. And it gives them the feedback on their phone. And it's pretty wild.
I love it.
Technology is there now to do this.
My son has had incredible experiences with neurofeedback, and I'm just so glad it's getting more accessible for home use because it is brain exercises that help all the things.
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys being on the show today. You guys, if you have any questions, want to reach out directly to them, you can check the show notes for all the things. And other than that, we appreciate you guys being here. Thanks for coming on the show, guys.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Be well till next time, my friends. Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox podcast. If you love this podcast, share it with others and leave us a review. Your reviews help us more than you know and supports us continuing to make episodes and being heard from all over the world. You can also follow the link in our show notes to submit a topic that you would like to hear on the show.